themselves through their own elected representatives in their own colonial assemblies. Americans enjoyed their tea. They gulped it down by the gallon, but they were willing to go without their favorite beverage rather than acknowledge Parliament's right to tax them. Throughout the 13 colonies, they had agreed to boycott British tea. British tea ships were turned away from New York and Philadelphia and sent back to England with their unwanted cargoes. In Charleston, South Carolina, a shipment of tea that had been unloaded was stored in damp warehouse vaults and left to rot. In Boston, where 3 tea ships were riding at anchor, the colonists were spurred to action. A group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty demanded that the ships leave Boston Harbor and carry their tea back to England owners. But Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts province, regarded loyalty to the king as his first responsibility. He insisted that the tea be brought ashore and the disputed tax in the form of import duty be paid in full. Now, we are going to talk to some of the residents of Boston and see what they have to say about King George III and his tax on tea. It is December 16, 1773. It is a cold, drizzly day. First, we're going to introduce you to Ethan, the errand boy, who we will follow around on his journey today. I have to introduce him more than that. Young boys of 11 or 12 often ran errands for merchants or householders. They worked in household stables, on the docks, at the mill, or did various unskilled tasks for merchants in exchange for food, board, or small amounts of money. They differed from apprentices who were taught a skill in exchange for room and board and were bound to their masters for a specific number of years.
Today is December 16, 1773. Boston is about to explode. I'm Ethan, errand boy, paper boy for the printer, messenger, wood chopper, runner of errands. My mother died when I was born, and my father drowned at sea. Now I sleep above the print shop, live by my wits. Nobody times my comings and goings. Errand boys, like servants, are almost invisible. It's a good cloak to wear. I keep my eyes and ears alert, and trouble is brewing. The Dartmouth, Eleanor, and the Beaver, crammed with tea, wait at Griffin's Wharf. Will King George and Parliament have their way? Will their custom men collect the tax? Will the tea company say who sells the tea? Let them try. The Sons of Liberty are counting on me. Off I go to slip in and out of shops and houses, sharing the notice about the final meeting at Old South. Pass the secret to the patriots and listen to the tittle-tattle from the loyalists. Midnight is the deadline when the tea must go or be taxed. What will happen now?
Ethan's first stop is at the printers. By 1732, there were print shops in most large cities in the colonies. Several of the shops were run or owned by women. In the larger shops, apprentices and journeymen took on the tasks of setting the type and running the press. In small shops, the work was done by one person. Print shops produced pamphlets, books, handbills, legal forms, and broadsides. But their most important service was the newspaper, which kept colonists informed of the current events and provided merchants with a place to advertise their goods and services. Newspapers were carried from colony to colony by travelers and post riders. The newspapers, pamphlets, and broadsides roused the indignation of many colonists against the laws and restrictions imposed by England and played a starring role in the quest for independence.
I am the printer. My job is to keep folks informed. I write, edit, compose the type, operate the press. When my husband and I opened our small shop, news of the king's birthday, missing cows, runaway slaves filled our paper. How times have changed. I'm a widow now, but I keep the press rolling. First Parliament passed the Stamp Act. The British soldiers occupied our town. Citizens were shot. I told each tale. Now Parliament and King George III have done it again. The terrible Tea Act, taxes to pay without any say. Unfair, cried the patriots. But what do the loyalists want and those who are in between? I've done my part, published the paper, printed the notice of today's meeting. Governor Hutchinson is the one who must decide whether the T-ship stays or go. What will the governor do?
Ethan's next stop is the baker. Let's find the baker. By the 1700s, bakeries could be found in every town in the colonies large enough to boast a tavern. Millers provided the baker with milled flour, and rye or white loaves were baked in brick ovens. The baker added more flour to the sponge, a thin dough made of warm water, yeast, flour, and mashed potatoes. The sponge was kept going daily. The bakers wore hats to keep the flour from covering their hair. Customers brought a napkin or a cloth to carry the bread home. The baker's wife or children usually sold the bread in the shop.
I am the baker. The big brick oven heats the room until we swelter, but bakes the bread with thickened crust the townfolk crave. I sift flour into a wooden trowel and stir the batch. My apprentice needs 100 pounds with burly arms and practiced hands. Slowly the dough bubbles and rises. Like liberty, I say. Here's Ethan making his rounds. He hands me a notice and shares the secrets from the Sons of Liberty. King George may be surprised by what we do. I wink and give the boy a loaf to feed on his way. Here's your note.
Ethan's next stop will be the mistress of the dame school. Young children in the northern colonies went to a dame school held in a woman's home. Students learned reading, writing, and simple sums, although arithmetic texts were scarce. A common school or writing school was also available for older students in large towns. Those teachers were men and the students mostly boys. There were a few boarding schools for young ladies. Children in the South were often tutored by a minister. In all the schools, the students read religious texts and were expected to obey the teacher. Discipline was strict. Slave children, for the most part, received no schooling.
I am the schoolmistress, and the kitchen is my schoolroom. When the sun is up, the children come to do their lessons. They join my Charlotte, Paul, and baby Benjamin. Abigail and Daniel bring firewood, part of my pay. Matthew, John, and Hannah have horn books around their necks. I start the day by reading from the Bible. Then we say rhymes to learn the letters A to Z. Paul's face turns red when we all chant, F is for fool. The idle fool is whipped at school. Yesterday, he poked Daniel during spelling. I didn't whip him, but I made him wear the whispering sticks all afternoon. Who comes? It's Ethan with news about today. I asked the scholars to repeat the time and place. Back to our books, we read aloud. Abigail knows the words. We clap. My heart sings, a special day were it not for those 3 tea-ships lurking in the harbor. King George does not give up, nor do we.
Ethan's journey then takes him to the shoemaker. The first shoemaker arrived in England in 1629. He was called a cordwainer. Walking was a major means of transportation for many colonists, so shoemakers were in high demand. At first, Boston was where the majority settled, but by 1721, there were several hundred shoemakers in New York. Children's shoes were made 2 sizes too large. Children wrapped their feet in cloth until they grew into their shoes. In the middle colonies, customers brought in their own leather. In the South, the shoemaker made shoes for slaves, but plantation owners often imported footwear for the families from England. The shoemaker's shop was a social place. where men discussed political issues while their shoes were made or repaired.
I am the shoemaker. Customers crowd my shop. Walking where soles thin, I never want for work. I measure the length of the foot, whittle the wood last, mark it with my customer's name. Sometimes I put a throbbing tooth for him who has an aching mouth, an extra charge. But always I listen as I work. I do not share my views, don't want to lose my customers who differ. But times are changing. This tea tax must not be paid. Meeting today? My teeth are worn from so much clenching. Mayhap the time has come to take a stand.
The next stop on Ethan's journey is the milliner. When we think of milliners, we often think of hats, but hats were not the only item that decked her shop. Fabrics, shoes, jewelry, lace, gloves, and dishes were imported from England, France, and Italy. She also sold